got some of the first details from the Prime Minister's office on what Mark Carney's cabinet will look like tomorrow. So first of all, it will have fewer than 30 ministers, but he'll bring back ministers or secretaries of state. That will be up to 10 members of that group. It is a second sort of outer ring of the team, if you want to call it, for smaller portfolios or to work on portfolios that really are breaking off the bigger portfolios. So between that, more than half of the members will be new faces walking up the driveway tomorrow or into Rideau Hall, however they decide to get there. So what does this tell us? Well, let's bring in our front bench. Former senior advisor to Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton. He's now partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers is vice president at Oyster Group. He worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. Kathleen Monk is the former director of communications for the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk and Associates. And Laura Stone is Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Welcome to Monday, all, and everybody's favorite day, the day before Cabinet, where we can talk about names and portfolios, and it's a bit of a dart game. So, Dan, I'm going to start with you on this one. Let's first talk about the composition and how we almost have these two rings of Cabinet, this inner core and then the outer ring. What do you think about going back to this sort of era? And I remember it under Stephen Harper, where we did have these ministers of state or secretaries of state. What do you think of how he's doing that?
Well, I think it's in an effort to send a message that they're getting down to work, that they've got focus, that they want to move quickly and get things done. Certainly, it does send a message that there are some portfolios that require senior leadership, people who have had extensive experience outside of government to be brought in to help provide, I think, fresh and new leadership for those big portfolios. It is, I think, a strategy that helps to continue that message of sharpening the focus that was in the pre-election cabinet that Carney rolled out just before calling the election. That is definitely an effort that this Prime Minister's office and this new Prime Minister have been undertaking, is to say, look, we're getting down to business. We're focused on a couple key sort of key priorities. And I will say, I think these secretaries of state, or ministers of state, I should say, help to take that another step further, to say there are a couple policy files that we think deserve a little bit more dedicated attention. We're going to give them to these specific individuals to help move those forward, because we think that very discrete policy area is required. I recall, Charles Sousa did this, Kathleen Wynne did this in the first mandate she had. She made Mitzi Hunter the associate minister for an Ontario pension plan at the time. And it was really an effort to say, this one thing that we ran on is so important, we need to have a policy file just dedicated and a minister just dedicated to that. So, I can see them sending a lot of messages like that tomorrow. The thing that I'll be looking for, though, is there change to the structure of some of these super ministries? Minister of Industry for the last number of years has had like 5 or 6 ministers in it, a whole bunch of different moving parts to it. Does the Prime Minister look to take a portfolio like Industry or like Natural Resources Canada and undertake some substantial change to how that department is presently structured, how we've come to see it structured over the last number of years, in order to move things forward? And certainly major infrastructure projects, major pipelines east to west, major Canadian nation-building infrastructure was a huge theme of Mark Carney during the campaign. So I could certainly see him looking at undertaking some change to how we structure some of the really big ministers and ministerial departments.
Shakir, that's one way of looking at it. The other way, I think, is that I remember during the Harper years, likely when you were in that Prime Minister's office, some people looked at them almost as junior ministers. How does the Carney government make sure that that's not how people see these ministers of state or secretaries of state?
So I think overall they will be junior ministers, but I think to Dan's point, they'll probably be specific on certain portfolios that are a priority to the Carney government. I think what's a bigger priority is honestly just getting things done. The composition and who he chooses in these key ministries will be very important, because I think some ministers are more skilled at, getting deputy ministers, at getting the bureaucracy to implement certain policies. And from everything I've heard from Mark Carney so far, he wants to move very fast, wants to be efficient, and just kind of get things done. So who are those key senior ministries that are driving things forward will be very important. I think the second big thing, and you had it up on your chart earlier, is just those 50% new faces in cabinet. who are these people? I think Mark Carney did a good job in the election, trying to implement or make the case that he was changed from Trudeau. And so you can't have these Trudeau-era cabinet ministers just rotating around in different portfolios. So who does he actually bring in that he trusts, that is competent to kind of get results that he wants? And I think the third thing that I would look for as well is someone like a Minister Freeland. Here's somebody who was a very senior minister in the previous government, obviously very close to Mark Carney as well, but she's held some of the highest positions you can hold in this government without being prime minister. It's hard to see her in a role moving forward that's a very senior role. She can't touch the Canada-U.S. file because Trump obviously doesn't like dealing with her. She won't be deputy prime minister because she was too close to Justin Trudeau. And so I wonder what happens to her if she actually gets a portfolio. And to be quite frank, if she even hangs around in this government, given that, for me, in my view, it's only downhill for her in terms of her responsibilities and seniority in this government.
Yeah, and Kathleen, I mean, you have to be careful with how you balance that. Also, at the same time, gender balance and regional balance as well. And all of these factors that you have to consider, especially what Shakir just said, 50-50 or half of them are going to be new. You got to make sure that there are people that can hit the ground running.
Yeah, and another controversy that happened in 2015 is that, if you recall, when Justin Trudeau brought in his new ministry when he was first elected, he even though he said they were all ministers, there was some indication in the order and councils that in fact they were junior ministers. Right. So he elevated them up, raised their pay grade, and said no, everyone is all the same. They're all ministers. And so I think when you see these numbers, like I'm hearing 28 and plus the 10 ministers of state, that's basically the size of a Trudeau cabinet. But if he, because his high water mark, I think, was 39 around the cabinet table. But just to build on what Shakir and Dan have said, I think the reason why he's having a smaller cabinet table, smaller number of ministers, is he wants to make decisions quickly. So having 40 people around the table, it's just too much. So this way, those ministers of state, those junior ministers, don't sit at that large decision-making table. They only come to that table when their file's being discussed. So that way he can move quickly, move more seamlessly. But other things I'm really looking for beyond how he changes departments is how he changes cabinet committees and actually how the structure of government works. Will there be a DM shuffle that comes with this? Because that's really how the actual machine of government starts to work, and that's really important to think about.
And whether or not they were people that were loyal to Trudeau or not, those deputy ministers are key.
And if they get stuff done and does stuff done quickly. Right?
Well, and that is what he wants. That is what he's saying he's doing. Laura, what are you looking for tomorrow when you see everybody walking into Rideau Hall and being sworn in?
Well, first of all, as a reporter covering Queen's Park, I want to know which minister was responsible for building the tunnel under the 401. I want to know if that's a full portfolio, maybe it's a junior minister.
If they walk in with a shovel.
Shovel it.
The one that walks in with a shovel, Laura.
Look, I mean, I think Kathleen is right in the sense that this is being portrayed as more of a focused cabinet, but then if we're broadening it out to, but other people get to be ministers, but only when, and it's a time of importance. There's so many more kind of considerations beyond just who is in cabinet, what those cabinet roles are. There's regional representation, there's gender parity, there's, making sure that maybe bringing certain people back into the fold under a Carney government, that promises are kept. What happens to leadership contenders, to Shakir's point? I want to know who's in those key portfolios that are of utmost importance to Mr. Carney's, Prime Minister Carney's first few months. Obviously dealing with the Trump administration, dealing with infrastructure, dealing with building pipelines and major infrastructure projects. Those are going to be key. We saw 3 of those faces, Ministers Jolie, LeBlanc, and McGuinty, brought into the meeting with President Trump. So surely they are either retaining their roles or going to remain part of that inner circle. But what happens to some of the other bigger names? So really, it's those key roles in putting out the fires, frankly, that Mr. Carney needs to deal with right now, and then sort of what is the creative thinking around these new secretaries of state or ministers of state, and where is their focus lie? So obviously there's going to be a lot of new faces. They're trying to make certainly a break from the past and a break from the Trudeau government. So I think they're going to try to tell a very focused story yesterday on what exactly Prime Minister Carney is going to focus on within his first 6 months in government.
Yeah, and if they were in the Oval Office, does that mean they will necessarily be in cabinet? That is something that we'll have to tune in tomorrow for.